tagliata, messa fuori, c'è Pirlo, ancora Pirlo di tacco, tiro, gol!
Hello and welcome to the AC Milan Talk podcast. I'm your host Amit Paul, and unfortunately we've got another disappointing result to discuss today. Milan were held to a goalless draw by Genoa at San Siro, with Leonardo Bonucci getting sent off in the first half. Looking at the negatives first, it's obviously another disappointing result, and depending on what Lazio do later tonight, Milan could find themselves further adrift of the top four. The red card was a huge blow, but I did pick up on some negatives prior to that. I felt like our performance was disjointed in terms of the build-up play and the pressing. There were situations where Kalinic found himself pressing the goalkeeper in the back too, wasn't being supported by his teammates, and Genoa were able to play out the back. So that was a negative for me, but obviously, as I said, the red card changed the complexion of the game and made things much more difficult for Milan. Positives, the second half was much improved. Even with the player deficit, we were the more dangerous side. We managed to sustain pressure and created chances. Switch to the back four was definitely a big plus in that. And, we can take positives from the second half. It was just missing that final bit of quality in the final third to make the difference. So, definite improvement after the break. Montella's manager rating out of 10, I've given him a 5. I think he does deserve some credit for the changes that he made in the second half, both tactically and for personnel-wise. He dealt with the sending off. We looked in control for the most part in the second half. However, he gets marked down for his persistence with a back three. I'm hoping that this was the biggest message yet for him to go back to a back four. So we'll have to wait and see when we play Chievo in midweek whether or not he does make the change. And also the delay in bringing on Patrick Cutrone was bitterly frustrating. I felt like we needed his urgency and increase the tempo much earlier. Kalinic was having a bad day, and that change should have come at least 10-15 minutes earlier than it did. So Montella gets marked down to a 5 because of that. On to the player ratings, I've given Donnarumma a 6. I think he made a couple of good saves and otherwise was untested, but I think importantly, he kept things simple in possession. Something I've picked on in recent games is that he's played risky passes and put his teammates under pressure at times, but he kept things much more simple and was alert to danger. So for that reason, he gets a solid 6. Christian Zapata gets a 7. A solid outing for him. Defended well and surprisingly didn't make any mistakes, which is what we've become accustomed to over the years. Produced a great recovery challenge to deny Gianluca Lapadula after he raced free. And I can't really pick any faults in his performance, to be quite honest. So he gets a 7. Bonucci gets a 4. Left his teammates short for the majority of the game with that reckless elbow. I know it's split opinions. Some have questions whether, the Genoa defender had his hands on Bonucci first. But ultimately, that's a wild swing of the elbow. And, with the help of VAR, he got sent off, which is I can't argue against, to be quite honest. So he gets a 4 for that. But even prior to his sending off, there was a situation where he got spun really easily by Andrei Galabanov to show even more defensive weakness. At times it almost looks as if he's carrying an injury. He just doesn't look his commanding self. And, we're going to have to deal without him now for the next 2 games at least with that straight red. So Bonucci gets a 4. Ricardo Rodriguez gets a 6. He did well to deal with Adel Taarab's trickery and movement, I felt, in an overall decent defensive display. Switched to a left back after the sending off and was his usual tidy self in his passing, so he gets a good solid 6 from me. The man Fabio Borini gets a 7. I think he's always going to lack that bit of quality in the final third to kind of make himself a standout player. A willing runner, worked tirelessly off the ball, even showed his versatility playing at right wing back, got switched over to the left late on, still gave it his everything, and you've got to commend him on that. And I'm hoping the general opinion and consensus has changed from what we saw earlier in the summer when he was getting blasted even before putting on a Milan shirt. So again, still lacks that quality in the final third, but I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10. Frank Kessie, 6 out of 10 for me. Poor first half performance. He was too passive, too sloppy on the ball, got caught out in possession on too many occasions. But to his credit, much like Milan in general, was much improved after the break. He made his, he showed off his strength. He made those bursting runs from midfield. Still doesn't make the right decision in the final third often enough. There were times where he should have passed rather than shot. His final ball wasn't always great. There's one instance where he broke forward, chipped it into the box, went for the back post, and absolutely nobody was there. So he needs to improve in that aspect of his game. But moving forward, there was definitely more positives from him, and he gets a 6 from me. Lucas Biglia gets a 5, and I'll be interested to hear your opinions on him. I feel like he's always tidy. You know what you're going to get from him. Like, he's always going to be a solid 6, maybe even 5 out of 10 player. But he just doesn't show enough personality for me in a game. Now, you've got to take into consideration the fact that we were down to 10 men, and he probably was restricted in the sense that he had to drop back and kind of give that coverage and defensive solidity in defence to protect the back line. But I just feel like he could be more mobile, he could be more commanding, a bit like Kessie in the sense that Kessie, grabbed the game by the scruff of the neck in the second half. I feel like Biglia needs to assert himself more. But, not a bad performance. Just I feel like there's much more that he could be doing and just showing that bit more of character in a game. So Biglia gets a 5 from me. Bonaventura gets a 5 as well. This just isn't the same Jack as we're used to. He tries to spark life into the game with a bit of skill, trying to get past his man, but he's just falling short at the minute. And obviously coming off with a muscular injury just isn't going to help him. We need him to be consistent, have a consistent run in the team, get his fitness back to 100%. And this latest injury setback isn't going to help him. But ultimately, there was moments where he was trying to G up the crowd, and I feel like he can do that single-handedly. Like I said, with a bit of skill, with a one-on-one situation, creating for others, but wayward shooting and just generally not at it. So Bonaventura gets a 5 from me. Suso gets a 7. I feel like he was constantly getting on the ball, particularly in the second half, trying to make something happen. Not always accurate with his shooting. There were a couple of shots that went wide. And, sometimes his passing let him down in the final third as well. But looked dangerous and definitely looked more comfortable out on the right wing. I felt like he was, and it's not just today, I think, playing through the middle. He's a little bit restricted. He doesn't look as, much of a threat as he usually does. Playing out on the right, taking his man on, cutting to the byline, cutting in on his left. Just feel like there's more dynamic sort of aspects to his game playing out on the right wing. And if we get that hoped change to a back four with a 4-3-3 again, moving forward with Bonucci out, seeing Suso on the right wing, because it's got to pay dividends for me. So gets a 7 on this occasion. I thought he was one of our more dangerous players. Fingers crossed, like I mentioned, we get that from him in terms of being on the right moving forward. Hakan Çalhanoğlu gets a 5. I feel sorry for him in the sense that, he obviously was desperate to bounce back. He made a positive start to the game, was really bad in midweek in the Europa League, so he had a point to prove, but someone had to be sacrificed after the Bonucci red card, and unfortunately it was him. So, like I said, positive start to the game, but just came off within 30 minutes and can't really give him more than a 5 or lower than a 5, to be quite honest. So 5 out of 10 for Çalhanoğlu. Kalinic gets a 4. I did feel the jeering when he got substituted was a little bit harsh, given the circumstances of the game. Isolated up top, didn't help himself in that regard, but down to 10 men, struggling to kind of string things together. I felt like it was a difficult day for him in general, but having said that, could have made more of a nuisance of himself. His touch wasn't there when it mattered. There were situations where he was put through by Suso, I remember once, didn't have the touch to kind of trap the ball and take a shot when he could have had a really good goal scoring opportunity, and just wasn't busy enough. Cutrone came on, put pressure on the defenders, got himself about. Kalinic wasn't making the runs in behind, wasn't running the channels to kind of give the team an option. He was just too content with sitting in the middle and not really doing anything. So he's kind of a bit of anonymous in that sense. So got to give him a 4 out of 10 for this one. Substitutes, Romagnoli first up. I'm going to give him a 7. I thought he looked really composed coming on, fill that slot in the back line with Bonucci sending off. It was really good to see him looking comfortable, playing in a back four, because ultimately I feel like that's going to have to be the way that Montella goes moving forward. Now we have to switch to a back four, and if Romagnoli looks good in the back four, then that just puts the pressure on Bonucci to stand up, show his experience, and slot into a back four as well, and that kind of takes that headache away from us. The back three not working for me, so good to see Romagnoli put in a good performance there. Davide Calabria gets a 6. I think he did a decent job on the right wing for the last half hour or so. Never really troubled defensively. I thought he was alert to that side of things, but could have been a bit more efficient moving forward. I felt like he could have been a bit braver, bursting runs down the right, and his crossing could have been better. I think there was a couple of occasions where he put the ball in the box and wasn't really particularly sort of dangerous, so give him a 6. Patrick Cutrone came on too late to give him a rating, but rightfully got his huge ovation after coming off the bench. The fans absolutely love him, and I felt like he could have come on much sooner, and he should have come on much sooner. Did his best to lift the tempo and kind of give the team a bit more urgency in the final few minutes, leading from the front. put himself about, but ultimately it was too late in the day for him to kind of really make an impact. So hopefully we get to see more of him, and Kalinic has got his work cut out to keep his place in the team. Twitter comments, Troy Vaughan at Hark the Sound simply says, bye Montella. Unfortunately for you and for many others, I imagine, the word coming out from Sky after the game was that the Milan are sticking with Montella. They've put their faith in him again, even despite the draw. So doesn't look like we're going to get that, unfortunately, Troy. Mirabelli Madness at Vergara for CB. 10 out of 10 for the Twitter handle. Not sure what Montella could have done. He got us playing decent in the second half. Can't argue with that. Absolutely. Like I mentioned in his rating, I think he was a key factor. The fact that we played much better in the second half with his sort of tactical tweaks and the changes in personnel. So I give him credit for that. But unfortunately, results business. We should have come away with 3 points in my opinion. So that's where the pressure still is on his shoulders. Angelo Santini at SN Jello, not a red, but still not an excuse. Game should have been 1, 11, 10 or 9 players on the pitch. Completely agree with your second point. I think the game was there to be won. Genoa didn't look as if they were particularly fond of the idea of attacking in numbers, and we had our chances. So definitely game should have been won. I disagree personally on the Bonucci incident. I'm sure people will have their opinions, so please feel free to leave your comments below. Honestly, again, as I mentioned earlier, I know Genoa defender had his arm on Bonucci first, but that was just a really wild, reckless swing with the elbow there. So for me, I don't think Bonucci's got much to argue about in that situation. And obviously, with the use of VAR, that was the ultimate decision which mattered. So Bonucci red there, unfortunately, but as I completely agree with you, Angelo, not an excuse. Samir Mohammed at Samir Mohammed 72. Let's be happy about the clean sheet, even with a man down. Patience is a virtue. Zapata did really well. Man of the match to Suso. Agree with you, Samir. Man of the match, either Suso or Zapata. I felt like those two guys were the standout players. May even probably swing to Zapata ever so slightly just for being so defensively solid. But hard to disagree with your pick there. And yeah, it definitely is a reason to be happy with the clean sheet. We've been too porous at the back with the 3 goals against Inter, previously conceding goals at home against Roma and not being defensively sound enough. And whether that's a coincidence that was with Bonucci off the field, who knows, but certainly a plus point from the game. So yeah, much improved defensively, and that comes back to the point in terms of back four. Is that the way going forward? Moz at Mr. GL. If Vincenzo Montella can't get his players to play a full 90 minutes of inspired football, management needs to move in a different direction. Only problem, who then? I completely 100% agree with your point about the full 90 minutes. It's all well and good playing good in patches for a half, for 70 minutes, but ultimately we've lost those games that we've played well in against Roma and Inter, and we've been held to a draw in this one. So you can play well for patches, but if you're not getting the results, then that's all that ultimately matters. Only problem, who then? It's a very serious problem. You've got to look at Ancelotti. He's the only kind of high-profile manager that's available that I'd like to see. Thomas Tuchel, maybe, the former Dortmund manager. Would he be a risky appointment? Then you've got to look at Antonio Conte. Chelsea had a fight back at the weekend, won against Watford, even though many fans were calling for Conte out during that game. Do we wait for him? Do we pull the trigger on Montella now, or do we wait till the end of the season? It's all up in the air, but certainly agree with your point. As Montella is in charge for now, he's got to get that out of the players for a full 90 minutes. I held a few polls after the game just to get your opinion on talking points. First one up was, which should Milan play with moving forwards? 2 options, stick with a back 3 or go to a back 4. Unsurprisingly to me, 80%, a large majority of you guys went with a option of going back to a back 4, 20% of course going with stick with a back 3. If this wasn't evidence enough of that working, then I don't know what else we need to see from Milan and Montella to know that the 4-3-3 or a variant of that, but with a back 4, works best for us. We can't keep playing to Bonucci's strengths when he's not even playing to his own strengths. So the back 3 for me is out the window. And, definitely considering the fact that he's going to be suspended now, I think it's a prime opportunity for us to go to a back 4. So let's, fingers crossed, we see that against Kiev, and then we'll decide from there whether it works or not. Second poll was, is it time for Montella to go? As I mentioned, kind of irrelevant, considering that the line from Sky was that Montella's safe and the board are backing him still. But definitely no split in your opinion, really. 83% of you voted, said yes, it's time for him to go. 14% said no, and 3% said more time. Still really trying to be in the more time bracket. Part of me that still would stick with the more time argument. but the results are not arriving. The gap is getting bigger. So, how much time is more time? How much more time do we give him? That's got to be the question at this point. So, Chievo this week and then Juventus to follow that afterwards. Things are getting really tricky for him. I think he'll get the benefit of the doubt with Chievo. But if we lose badly to Juventus, then I think there's got to be curtains for Montella. But as I said, the board seem to be throwing their faith behind him. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Right, guys, that's a wrap for this podcast. Thanks for listening. As always, please leave your thoughts and player ratings below if you disagreed with me. Leave your thoughts on whether Montella should go, whether it's time up for him. Give me your thoughts on tactics. Should we go back to a back four or should we stick with a back three, especially with Bonucci now out of the team? What's your preferred tactics moving forward? And ultimately, let's just hope that we get a positive result against Chievo. As I mentioned, that gap is getting bigger to the top four. And Rossoneri worryingly suggesting that Champions League won't be the end of the world, and ultimately we'll have to sell players to kind of make up the deficit from the finances that we'll miss out on. So that will be another debate for another day as to who would be sacrificed in that situation. But I'd like to think that we're not out of the race just yet, but we certainly need to motor on at this point. So thanks for listening as always. Please leave your comments below, subscribe on YouTube, and until Wednesday, that's a wrap for this week.